All right, well, plenty of hockey took place this weekend as the Wild and Blues squared off in games 3 and 4. Wild had all the momentum, outscoring the Blues 11-3, taking that 2-1 series lead, but last night came out the gate flat-footed and just never seemed to find that same momentum again, ultimately losing the Blues 5-2, who tied the series back up. Let's bring in our Wild and hockey expert now, Seth Topol, who had a busy weekend with plenty of insight and post-game reaction up on the Locked On Wild show. Make sure to check that out, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota Network. So, Seth, we're going to try to give the listeners a little 2-for-1 here, break down both games from the weekend collectively, despite two completely different outcomes. But let's start here, like I always do, and first discuss your thoughts on the Wild announcing Marc-Andre Fleury in the net for games 3 and 4, despite, again, Cam Talbot had that hot hand heading into the playoffs. Remember, he was 13-0-3 down the stretch, but he's just 15-15 in the postseason. So they clearly made that move to go out and get the veteran with the Stanley Cup on his resume for this time specifically. And I think the message is clear now. They were never really going to waver on that decision. It turns out the only real debate was probably, with the fans and the media, but inside that locker room, it seems like it was hands down Fleury's net all along come playoff time. Would you kind of agree with that assessment? And I guess now, are there any chances, knowing what we know, we'll see Cam Talbot at all in this series?
Well, first off, thanks, guys, for having me on once again. Always enjoy hopping on. And you look at it, and Dean Evison said it himself, and this was never meant as a slight to Cam Talbot, said that it was an easy decision for the Wild to go with Marc-Andre Fleury, as decorated of a postseason performer as you will ever find as a goalie, and somebody who we saw a goalie in St. Louis, in Ville Husso, who has not had to deal with the postseason struggles yet. And really, between games 2 and game 3, he was rattled. And, he had a couple of really bad performances back to back. And I talked about it in Locked On Wild between the two games. It was going to be fascinating to see how Husso adjusted and what he did differently between the two games. And, a guy who has been in as many playoff games as Marc-Andre Fleury has been knows that you have to flush a bad performance from one game to the next, and you really just have to come in with a completely clean slate. And Fleury has had some really good moments. I thought he was pretty much the sole reason that the game 4 was 1-1 after one period. The Wilds as a team started off really flat in that game. Fleury was not. And overall, this whole series has come down to some really simple things in my mind. The team that gets off to the better start and kind of dictates the pace, dictates the tempo and the energy has been the one that's won the game. And the team that scored first has also won every game in this series. So the Blues were the desperate team in game 4. The Wild didn't match that. They brought it later in the game. And I wonder what would have happened had the Wild simply matched that intensity level that the Blues showed right off the bat to maybe be able to take that game. It just is one of those things you learn from it. You just can't go into a game where the other team is as desperate as the Blues were. And you can't be anything less than your A game, or it's going to be really hard to try to get back into it.
Seth, the Wild have two stars going in different directions right now. Kirill Kaprizov has been a huge producer in this series, scores the game-tying goal on Sunday, scores the crazy bank shot goal on Friday, had a hat trick on Wednesday. I mean, he's showed up since that game 1 kind of flopped by the whole team. Kevin Fiala, though, where is he? Tell me about where Fiala is, and then if you want to, you can contrast that with the positive of Kirill Kaprizov really showing up.
Well, this is what we didn't see from this team last year. Is you have two lines that are capable of scoring and scoring dynamically. And the Kaprizov line has taken the lead in this series against St. Louis. The Boldy, Fiala, Gaudreau line has been pretty quiet in terms of goal scoring so far this series. And whereas those two line dynamics didn't exist against Vegas, and so with the Kaprizov line shut down, nobody else really stepped up. Kaprizov has taken the lead, which is something that I think a lot of Wild fans were excited to see. I was excited to see myself. He has been the guy that has taken charge of this series, as he should be. Kevin Fiala, on the other hand, I think is starting to get frustrated with the lack of scoring that him and his line have been able to do in this series. And hopefully the goal that Matt Boldy was able to score to make it 3-2 was a positive sign that this line has taken. But, at the end of the day, Fiala's performance, whenever he's not scoring goals, is way more scrutinized, as it should be. But I'm hoping that goal that they scored late will be one that they can kind of build off of going forward. But yeah, Kaprizov taking the lead is great. If they can get both Kaprizov and Fiala scoring in the rest of the series, I really like the Wild's odds. But it comes down to that line just not pressing too much. I feel like they're kind of trying to do more than they should, which has led to some penalties that Fiala took. I think he had 14 penalty minutes in Game 4, which is way too much. But if they can just kind of simplify it and get back to their game, I think they're going to be fine. And that then makes St. Louis have to decide, do we try to slow Kaprizov? Do we try to slow Fiala? And at that point, then one of those lines gets more opportunities.
Seth, we talked about injuries playing a bigger factor heading into the playoffs last week than maybe most fans realized. Both teams continuing to get more and more banged up in certain areas. I'm just wondering, how do you feel heading into this final stretch of the series, given where both teams stand on the injury front? And how do you think that could impact Game 5 specifically? I mean, does one team have it far worse than the other in the health department right now? Is one team at a far bigger disadvantage when you look at this injury report?
Yeah, the Blues are the team that is hurting more on the injury front. They lost Marco Scandella in Game 4 after one period. They announced, coming into the second period that he wasn't going to return for that game. So his status going forward is in doubt. They've got a couple of other guys on the blue line that are missing as well. I'd imagine Nick Leddy will return, which will be a big boost for them, but still playing shorthanded. They had two guys on the blue line in Game 4 that played something like 27 minutes apiece. And so that was another point, I think, that was frustrating in watching the Wild, is they didn't really seem like they tried to exploit that and tried to attack a tired D-core that the Blues had. And so that's going to be something that, going back to home ice on Tuesday, that's going to be something that they need to try to pick apart. Is if the Blues are shorthanded, they're going to have guys that are playing heavy minutes, and you got to just run right at those guys and try to exploit tired legs. And I would imagine, as we talked about after Game 1, as a lot of media members have pointed to in this series, that this Wild team is very good at adjusting, and so I expect them to come out of the gates much better in Game 5 than they did in Game 4. And I think that's going to include attacking that D-core as they should.
I think the Wild have to be thrilled, though, to get to Binnington versus Husso. I know that Husso had been struggling, and you kind of broke him, but Binnington has been struggling as well. He had his worst goals against average in his career this season. He hadn't won in his last 9 playoff starts until yesterday. Doesn't it feel like at some point, now that the Wild are at home, to come out with that energy, that Binnington is there for the taking as well, and that might actually be open the door for the Wild to get some goals on the board?
100%. And you look at the way that this series has unfolded, the Wild forced the Blues to make major changes first. And so if in Game 5, if they stick with Binnington, which I'm sure they will, if that doesn't work, then do you go back to Ville Husso, who has been cooked by this Wild team in 2 of the games that he started? I don't think the Wild really tested Binnington enough in Game 4. You look at his performance overall, and yeah, he was good, but they didn't test him early, and that led to him getting comfortable as the game progressed. I think if they would have fired a few more shots at him early on, I feel like that game was definitely there for the taking. And so I'll take my chances with this Wild team going up against Binnington at the Xcel Energy Center, because he is a guy too where if things aren't going well for him early, he tends to melt down. And so I like the fact that the Wild have the Blues on the ropes. Ultimately, you would have liked to have won Game 3 and Game 4, but the Wild got home ice advantage back. And so now they just have to win 2 out of the next 3 games, with 2 out of the next 3 games at home. All that math adds up, I think, to some good things for the Wild. It's just a matter of getting that intensity going early and dictating the tempo and being the one to kind of put the Blues into adjustment mode, as opposed to having to figure out how to overcome a 2-goal deficit as they have in both games they've lost.
Yeah, a lot of great points there. Heading into the playoff series with the Blues specifically, everyone talked about that, their rivalry over the last few years, the Blues being the Wild's kryptonite as of late. Both teams know each other so well because these teams go way back. I did a little digging, okay, fun little nugget. Turns out this rivalry goes way back further than even I knew. Back on October 11th, 1967, it was the Minnesota North Stars taking on the St. Louis Blues in both teams' inaugural season and first game ever as NHL franchises. Anybody want to take a guess how that game turned out? Game 1 of both teams' franchise?
I'll give you the first crack.
Tied 2-2. They tied 2-2. Unbelievable. We sit here today, series tied up 2-2. You can't make it up. So if history tells us anything, this series will come down to the wire. Seth, thanks so much. You're our Wild and hockey expert. Seth Topol, check him out nearly every day of the week on Locked On Wild, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota Network, and with Kevin Gorg with their post-game reaction. Seth, where else can the people find all your great work at, and anything special coming up we should keep our eyes peeled for?
Well, I'm obviously going to continue to. We try to break down every game with the what happens on the off day and then gear up for the next game on the day of the game. So you can really separate those parts and allow a little time to digest what we saw and gear up with some changes for the next game. So we're continuing with that. We, of course, have the postcasts as well with Kevin Gorg. So you can look for another one of those after Game 5. But mostly just trying to give as much recap and reaction to all of these games as we can. So follow Locked On Wilds. Wherever you listen to your podcast, we're getting a great playoff bump, which is absolutely something we love to see. Keep an eye on that, as well as YouTube. YouTube is taking off as well, so make sure to follow us on YouTube, and we'll keep you up to date every single game that this postseason push continues for the Wild, and hopefully things are just getting started.
Absolutely. You guys are crushing it, doing such a great job, giving the fans such great coverage of these Wild playoff hockey. Awesome stuff. Thanks again, man. Hopefully we'll talk to you again real soon, all right?
Sounds great to me, guys. Anytime you want me, I'm there.
You're the man. Seth
Thanks,
Topol,
Seth.
ladies and gentlemen.
Winding back the clock 55 years, Luke, for
did
that
that
little
stun
nugget.
you? Did you know that? Is that not wild or what? I had to throw that out today because I just thought, unbelievable. 2-2. They tied 2-2. We sit here today, Sam. The series is tied 2-2. First game ever for both franchises. 1967. Where were you, Sam?
Where was I? Yeah, I was nothing. I wasn't even a dream. But
Don't say that about yourself.
If you had quizzed me, when did the North Stars franchise begin? I probably would not have been within 10 years. I just don't have enough North Stars knowledge in I'm of the Wild generation. I didn't grow up with the North Stars the way some people did. So I wouldn't have known that. I know that the North Stars lost 2 Stanley Cups, and that's about it.
It all boils down to the best of 3 series, as you and Seth kind of laid out. We mentioned the Wild owning home ice in 2 of those. So you got to feel good about that at least. Again, Game 5 tomorrow night. Puck drops 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be here Wednesday and all week to break down all the action.